Thank you. Good evening, friends. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. That's better. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of this important event for holding it again this year, which is so important. This Saturday, we've had a quite fruitful day of deliberations, which featured several speakers, including some members of the Cuban delegation present here, who were attending the annual session last week of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, at the United Nations. So please join me in giving a big round of applause, not only to the organizers, but to the presenters as well. On behalf of the Permanent Mission of Cuba to the United Nations, I'm honored to convey at this rally warm greetings and our deep appreciation to you all for your long-standing solidarity and, most importantly, firm support to Cuba in our struggle against the unjust economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the US government. Dear friends, brothers and sisters, according to the organizers, this 2025 International US-Cuba Normalization Conference is dedicated to Malcolm X's memory and legacy in the centenary of his birth. I join other speakers who tonight have paid tribute to the great Malcolm X, to the great Malcolm X. Let us recall that in September 2023, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel and his delegation visited this center right here to pay homage to Malcolm X. The Cuban president said that educating on the ideas of Malcolm X is the best way to pay tribute to him. The relationship between Cuban leader Fidel Castro and Malcolm X was based on solidarity. For Fidel and Cuba, Malcolm also defied the powers of the moment. We will never forget, we Cubans will never forget his role in inviting the rebel leader and his delegation to stay at the Theresa Hotel in the heart of Harlem neighborhood when there was an attempt to boycott the Cuban presence at the United Nations in 1960. We're grateful for that. That generous and fraternal gesture culminated in the historic meeting between Malcolm X and Fidel in September 1960, about which President Díaz-Canel said, and I quote, "That historic dialogue between them, which other generations of Cubans and Americans have held for more than 6 decades with respect, admiration, and mutual affection, is and will be the most beautiful proof of how much we have in common as children of both peoples who believe in justice and fight for it." Therefore, dear friends, at this rally, we, the representatives of Cuba, once again honor Malcolm X. And with him, we pay tribute to our African Americans brothers and sisters, to the people of the United States, and to those who fight for justice, to all those who believe, like Malcolm and Fidel, that a better world is possible. Dear friends, The policy of permanent hostility and blockade of the United States government continues to be the main cause of the difficulties of our economy. The economic war has a high human cost for the population and continues to be an incentive for emigration as well. Let me give you some figures. From March 1st, 2023 till February 29, 2024, the blockade caused material damages to Cuba estimated at over $5 billion US dollars. I'm talking about a year, $5 billion US dollars. Now, this represents an impact of more than 420 million a month and more than $13 million a day, or more than $500,000 per hour in damages. At current prices, the damages accumulated during more than 6 decades of the implementation of this policy exceed 164 billion US dollars. 164 billion US dollars. Now, let me ask you, what would Cuba be like today if we had had these resources? It'll be different. But as we mentioned, the aggression continues. On January 14, 2025, you may recall, the Biden administration announced decisions that put an end to just few of the dozens of coercive measures which seriously damaged the Cuban economy, and that have had a severe impact on the population. For example, they decided to remove Cuba from the State Department's list of countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism, which is a unilateral list. Despite its limited scope, as the Cuban authorities said, it was a decision that rectified in a very limited way some of the aspects of a cruel and unjust policy, but that was done on the verge of a change of government in the United States, when it should have been materialized years ago as an elemental act of justice. 6 days later, on January the 20th, without any pretext whatsoever, the new US president reversed the said limited decisions that had been taken by the Biden administration. One of the measures taken is the reinclusion of Cuba to the arbitrary list of states that allegedly sponsor terrorism without evidence, justification, or respect for the truth. The decision and steps taken by the new US administration to reinstate the tough economic warfare measures against Cuba is a demonstration of its aggressiveness against the sovereignty, peace, and well-being of the Cuban population. More recently, on February of this year, the new US Secretary of State, Rubio, announced visa restrictions for Cuban government officials and anyone else in the world who is complicit in the island's nation's foreign medical assistance programs. This action has international consequences. For decades, tens of thousands of Cuban medical professionals have been stationed in some 60 countries, mostly working in underserved populations in the global south. Attacking Cuban health services in developing countries on the basis of lies represents an aggression against the only way for millions of people to receive medical care. I think we should emphasize that access to health is a human right. The US government accuses Cuba of alleged human trafficking, but this is a pretext. The real objective is to undermine both Cuba's international prestige and the income it receives from the export of medical services, and also, in the process, to limit the potential of Cuba's public health system. Dear friends, Cuba will continue to face and condemn the U.S. economic warfare policy, the foreign interference programs, and the disinformation and discredit operations financed every year with tens of millions of dollars of the U.S. federal budget. We have consistently demonstrated Cuba's willingness to have a respectful relationship with the U.S. based on dialogue and not interference in the internal affairs of both countries, despite the differences that we obviously have. The U.S. blockade is not only a challenge to ethics and humanism, is in fact a violation of the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, of the United Nations Charter and the international law. The historic leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro Ruz, led the moral battle of ideas against the blockade from the very beginning. It denounced it inside and outside Cuba, including at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The continuity of that struggle from the highest leadership of our country has been worthily embodied in Raúl Castro Ruz and in our current president, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, with the full support of the Cuban population, including the active participation of our diplomatic service as well. For 32 years, the United Nations General Assembly, its most representative and democratic body, has adopted by vote the text of a resolution on the necessity of ending the United States blockade against Cuba. The most recent exercise, as you know, took place in October of 2024, when 187 states voted in favor and only 2 voted against. Now, let me on that say the following: 187 countries cannot be wrong. On this topic, it's crystal clear that the US government is totally isolated and on the wrong side of history. It is time to do the right thing by removing the blockade so that our 2 countries can have a mutually beneficial relationship based on respect. Friends, the Cuban nation has demonstrated and will continue to demonstrate its will to resist and move forward in the face of obstacles. The successful battle waged against COVID-19 is one of the most recent examples of this determination. In fact, our efforts were not limited to our borders in Cuba, and we have made our humble contribution to other countries in a manner consistent with our internationalist vocation. Sending doctors and not bombs has been Cuba's practice. During these 6 decades, over 600,000 Cuban health professionals have collaborated in 165 countries. And during COVID-19 pandemic, members of the Henry Reeve contingent provided services in 40 of them. Besides, more than 31,000 young people from 122 countries, including the United States, have graduated from the ELAM school in Havana. And you know that we're going through a very difficult period. But in our case, it's not about providing others what we can spare, but to modestly sharing the very little resources that we have. Friends, I would not like to conclude my remarks without reiterating our deepest gratitude to all of the good people in the world, including friends like you, who have supported the demand to end the US blockade and other unilateral measures imposed on Cuba. The Cuban Revolution needs again your solidarity in the face of the new and dangerous onslaught of aggression that has just begun. The US authorities will continue to do a lot of damage with their plans and measures, but that they will never achieve their main objective. They will never achieve their main objective of bringing Cuba to its knees in order to subjugate it. Will they achieve it? No, they won't. So I reiterate before this audience that these challenges will not divert us from our revolutionary path. We are on the right side of history. And no one should be deceived. Our conviction prevails that Cuba will win. Long live the legacy of respect and friendship forged by Fidel and Malcolm X. Long live the solidarity movement with Cuba. Hasta la victoria siempre venceremos. Please. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Thank you very much.